Listeners, have we got a treat in store for you, because the Eventing podcast has launched some super comfortable and stylish merchandise for you to purchase. And there is something for you to wear all year round. There's a baseball cap, a gilet, a coat and a woolly hat too. It is perfect for any occasion, from a winter walk to attending an event. There really is something for everyone. Plus, 5% of all sales goes to Tiggy's Trust too. Head to stitchedequestrian.com to shop the full range. Oh God, it's so exciting. Happy Hail Bob Day.
It is a happy Hail Bob Day.
Hello, the curse of Dam.
It's the best finishing score we've seen at 5-star level.
That was our elo coming into the competition.
Eventing Manager is back.
Best show that we have, Alphabetti Spaghetti.
Looking forward to seeing quality horses.
Still a great day for Ireland.
Thank you very much for coming on the show.
I mean, you're a bit of an eventing geek just like us.
And it's time to get on with the show. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing podcast, and listeners, we have got an Eventing Podcast Classics show for you today. So this one is the first ever Eventing All Over the World show that we did. It is a US special with a very special guest, Frankie Thieriot Stutes, and it was first released on the 29th of October 2019, so just over 2 years ago, and it is a real insight into US eventing. So here we go. Enjoy. Welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing podcast and a brand new series, Eventing All Over the World. And the first episode is all about US eventing. I'm delighted to welcome somebody who is a mother. She's a businesswoman. She's a 5-star eventer. I mean, talk about feeling inadequate, because she is an absolute superwoman. Hello, Frankie Thieriot Stutes.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, we're so happy to have you on the Echo Ratings Eventing podcast, and we can't wait to hear your take on US eventing, because we're going to go into a little bit more detail on US eventing as it is. But for those listeners who might not be familiar with you, you were 4th at Le Moulin in the 5-star a little bit earlier on this year. You were the 2018 US national champion. You have a wonder horse called Chatwin, and we'll come on to him in a moment. But just fill us in on the rest of your life, because like I say, you're a little bit of a superwoman.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far, but I have a lot of balls to juggle, that's for sure. And, you know, I run 2 companies. Athletics Equine is one of my companies, and it's how I stay in the horse world without being in the arena all day long. I leave that up to some of my friends and peers and some of the people we work for, but it's a great company I started almost 10 years ago, which is super crazy to me. And through it, I'm able to work with a lot of the top eventers and equestrians in the world. And a lot of them have become my close friends. So it's really fun, and doing their marketing and PR and social media and sponsor stuff. And so that's kind of my main gig, I would say. My 9 to 5, or really my unlimited hour job.
I was going to say, is it 9 to 5?
No, it's all the time, we tell clients. But we like to, you know, for that, we really consider ourselves an extension of people's team. And it's something, you know, I used to work with all different athletes in all different sports, and I love equestrian. So it's something that now is just equestrian or equine based, and that's really exciting for me. And I have a great team on that side of things that helps keep the ball rolling, a full-time team of staff now. And then a couple of years ago, when I had my first son, I lost my mind, I think, temporarily, and decided that I needed to help the world find a better solution for handbags and baby bags, because the baby bags on the market were so ugly, in my opinion. So I created this handbag line, and it's just kind of a fun side thing where I pack people's orders at night. It's called Frankie Cameron. So I have that, and then obviously Chatwin, like you said, and I have a 4-year-old and an almost 2-year-old, which you can relate to being a new mom yourself.
Yeah, and, I'm not going to lie, the life juggle. Yeah.
Yeah, I have 2 boys, and they are wild and crazy, and definitely keep me on my toes, but also keep things in perspective.
So you're a businesswoman. You have a handbag design business, which I did not know about you, and I thought that is just amazing. 2 boys, so just old enough to get in tons and tons of trouble. And you also event at the highest level as well. You were 4th in Le Moulin a little bit earlier on this year. on Chatwin's 5-star debut. Just talk to us a little bit about him, because he's only an 11-year-old this time. He's had some incredible results. He's won multiple times at 4-star long level and obviously stepped up with a hugely impressive result. He's had a little bit of time off at the back end of this year, but surely you'll be sort of thinking a little bit about Tokyo next year, can I say?
Yeah, I mean, you don't want to make it your end all be all, but it's definitely something we have our sights set on. And this year was just a weird season all in all. It was one of those seasons where kind of nothing goes right, and people will look at a 4-star finish at Lemuelin and say, well, something went right. But, that was a great event for us. But all in all, it was just such a crazy year, one I couldn't even describe. I mean, if you look at our record, it's kind of laughable almost, because we started off the season with a lot of rain at Fresno, and
that's basically what we've got in the UK at the moment. Lots and lots and lots of rain.
Yeah, so I withdrew before stadium because it wasn't in his best interest to show jump. I didn't feel in the really muddy, poor conditions that had kind of deteriorated by Sunday. And then, I went and ran an advanced horse trials, and we were winning that. And then my penny somehow got stuck to my air vest of all things, and I had to halt for about a minute and undo myself.
Oops.
And so, we had a really good result, show jumped clean, had a great test, but had a lot of time faults there, and then went to Galway Downs, slipped in the turn, just crazy things. And then we were meant to go to Kentucky this year, and Chatwin had what we thought was a serious injury, and then a week later ended up being completely nothing. And then he went to Lemuelin, had a great finish, came home, and we were named to the team for Buccolo, which was very exciting. And then of all things, he got enteritis, which is basically a stomach infection where 95% of cases, they'll never have anything like it again. And I almost actually lost him.
Oh, so, wow.
Yeah, so it was kind of a crazy year. And just like I said, one where you can't see anything coming. It wasn't like he got, really injured or anything, but he was in intensive care. And I was kind of faced with thinking, is my partner in crime here going to make it out of this?
But he has made a full recovery, hasn't he? And you just decided not to travel over to Buccolo. And he's on holiday, and he is sort of preparing himself to come out back again in 2020.
Absolutely, yeah. And he came actually out of the hospital really well, and I was able to take him to Twin Rivers still at the end of the season in September, what was meant to be our last final run before Buccolo. And, with the amazing, horses come first mentality that the U.S. team, I feel like, is adapting with Eric Duvander at the reins and Susan Johns, who's an amazing vet, as our team vet. We kind of came together and said, hey, he was very sick, and we're lucky he's okay. And he's still not 100, or at that point, he still wasn't 150% kind of to ship him across the globe. And so we decided to err on the side of caution. But like I said, he still went to Twin after being sick and did a combined test there. And I think he was winning the advanced division by 20 points when I scratched him. So the bummer was he felt, the bummer was he actually at that point felt better in his training and his daily work than he's felt maybe ever. And so I was really disappointed to not get to ride him at Buccolo. But at the same time, after him being so sick, I knew that the best thing for him was to, do Twin Rivers, have him back in work, and then give him this holiday that he would usually get at the end of the year early, so that he has a little longer to get fit again for next season, and so that he kind of physically was able to gain some weight and be ready to be fighting fit again.
Have a good holiday. He's already got his Tokyo long format qualifier. So that's sort of a tick in the box that you don't have to worry about coming out next spring and have to do a long format. But can I ask if the plan A would be Kentucky if all things go well?
Yeah, I mean, I think it will be. I've learned more than anything this season. You need a plan A, B, C, D, and E. So I think
we've got alphabetti spaghetti on this podcast. We go all the way. Yeah,
I think that one's set to be A for us. But, I also, the week he got sick, was meant to take him to the American Eventing Championships, which were also in Kentucky. And he got sick just a few days before he flew. So I'm going to maybe trick him and tell him that Kentucky is in Asia or something different, because he seems to have an aversion to the state of Kentucky this year. But that will be plan A. It's been made pretty clear through the selectors and Eric that Kentucky is pretty much mandatory for the heavy hitters looking to do Tokyo, we think. So I think we're going to see a lot of decisions made after what happens in Kentucky this year.
It's so exciting, isn't it? Like, you just start to think about things like that, and the sort of the final spring events. And when we go into those spring events, there is so much riding on it. I cannot wait. Absolutely cannot wait. Well, we can't wait to see Chatwin back next year, but let's talk about US eventing as a whole. So for any of our listeners that aren't overly familiar with eventing over in the United States, let's first of all just talk about the sort of the season that you run on, because we are obviously at the end of October and you've got a couple of events still left. You've got Galway and you've got Ocala for your final sort of big event of the year. But then actually it's a shorter break, isn't it? Because they come back and the season really kicks off again sort of back end of January, early February for some of the big events on the West Coast.
Yeah, well, you know what's interesting about the United States is our 5-star. Obviously, we're getting another one next year, which will be great in Fair Hill later in the season. But right now in the States, you only have Kentucky, and it's in April. So our calendar gets started a little bit earlier, but actually for those horses who are legging up to go to Kentucky, I feel like that's helpful because April comes very, very fast.
Yes, it does. Yeah. And we actually have that over in the UK, you know, badminton horses. It doesn't take a lot for something to go wrong in March or for you to lose one or two events with the weather. And all of a sudden, you know, you just have to reroute or you have to make a plan B or C because it comes up so quick.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, our seasons start pretty early here, especially, you know, for those East Coast horses and riders. A lot of them will go down to Aiken or they'll go to Florida. So they'll train there all winter long. And a lot of things get started early on, especially in Florida in January events. And then, you know, going into February on the West Coast, we have California shows. Really, the first FEI is actually in February. So it gets going pretty quickly.
That's actually a really interesting point to talk about because I always find it absolutely fascinating how riders over in the US, obviously there are, you know, you kind of have to go to the better weather to a degree, which is obviously very attractive in itself, but it means that eventing is much easier and much, much more likely to take place. But they will go and base themselves, won't they? Whether it be down in Aiken, whether it be sort of in Ocala, and they kind of almost will go and take an entire string for a few months and compete from a hub, won't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think almost every single one of them does it, all the heavy hitters for sure. And I have to say my hat is off to them because as someone based on the West Coast, especially with a family, I think it's really difficult to do that. And they, you know, it just shows their tremendous dedication because they move their whole barns, you know, their horses, their families, their lives, and they pick it all up usually around Christmas time and they head on down and then most of them, I think, head back, you know, around Kentucky time. So it's quite a unique thing, I would say, about the East Coast in America and really does take a lot of work, especially, I mean, you think about that from a groom standpoint even, or a barn manager, moving all those horses and all those things. And in a lot of cases, they have to take multiple trips to get everybody where they're going.
And actually, that's an important point in itself because it's not just a couple of hours on the road. You know, you're looking at a long, long trip.
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, you're looking at, you know, over 20 hours. Like, they're very long trips.
Crazy.
And so it's quite a process and quite an extravagant thing to make that move. But a lot of them have barns in both locations and places they've gone back and forth for a very long time. So they're used to doing it. So it's, you know, it's an interesting component for sure.
I find it absolutely fascinating. And it makes, I think it kind of shows the real difference of sort of how compact the UK eventing scene is in comparison to, you know, the States is enormous compared to the UK. And, you know, we're going to have the same conversation about eventing over in New Zealand, over in Australia, because they also have similar sorts of challenges. And it isn't just a case of you hop in your lorry and you've got an event half an hour down the road. There is a lot more to it. We've touched about heading into Tokyo. Obviously, Kentucky is going to be a big turning point in the spring in terms of team selection. Eric Devander actually came on 2 years ago to coach the US team. He had previously been with Team New Zealand. So he's been 2 years into his role. How, from a rider's perspective, is that going in terms of the changes that he's made, the team ethic that he's created? And it's sort of an exciting time for US eventing, a rebuilding period perhaps, but definitely heading in a really positive direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think Eric has definitely shown tremendous dedication to this country and to helping to move it forward. And that's been very exciting. As somebody in the program, obviously my standpoint is very different from somebody not in the program, but what he has done, which I've been tremendously impressed with, is he has fully dedicated himself to the riders on the list, as well as helping others who ask for his help. And he's flown all over the country. Literally, I mean, we were just talking about how big this country is, and Eric's based on the East Coast, but, he still flew out to my personal barn several times this year. I think 5 or 6 or 7 times I saw him throughout the season, where he came for, multiple days every time to check in with us, to train with us, and to really get to know each of us and our horses, which is, it's pretty incredible and really, I think, going to pay off in the long term. And I think one of the really interesting points about all of it is that he's taking the time to get to know everyone individually so he can best help you. And the thing I've noticed that's really different maybe from how it's been in the past is he wants you to stay in your comfort zone in certain elements, obviously get out of your comfort zone in other elements to make you a better competitor. But he believes if you have a program that's working, let's figure out what those elements are that are working and try to stick with them. So I think that's been one great component. And, it's interesting because when you hear 2 years, to me, that sounds like a really long time. But in terms of rebuilding an entire program, it's not. And I think last year was just more getting to know the program before he could make a plan to fix it or put it in the direction he feels is the right direction. And
make
this
changes.
year, Exactly. And this year, I feel like we've seen him begin to implement some of those changes. And there's been some controversial things, obviously, with, a very small number of riders named to the training list. And some riders people felt should have been left put on or were left, weren't on it, etc. But basically, I think that he has a long-term plan, and he's shown that he's incredibly dedicated to his job and to his goals. And I think it's a rebuilding. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think we're headed in a good direction.
Am I right in thinking that one of those changes would be the introduction of like a training camp prior to some of the big events? So pre-Buccolo, and I think it was pre-Aachen as well, that there was a training camp that those riders that were going sort of went into. They had 3 or 4 days intensive training. They were all working together, more of a team environment. Do you think that's sort of making a positive impact?
I mean,
as
I'm
well?
not sure if they've done that in the past, to be completely honest with you, but I was actually fortunate enough to be at the training camp at Buccolo or prior to Buccolo, and I do think it really helped with the camaraderie and riders really kind of knowing how each other ticked and things going into the event. Last year they did a similar thing, obviously, before shipping into WEG and some things like that, but I think that, it's just kind of trying out different things to see what's going to work best.
What's going to make the real impact. We've just mentioned Buccolo. Now, that was the first major event that Jenny Autry, our very own Jenny Autry, we missed you, Jenny, was sort of in charge of it in her role as director of eventing. How was the team of 3 format because you were there, you were on the ground, you were obviously heavily involved in the US team. How did it come across to you? What were your thoughts on it?
I mean, it's fascinating. I will say that. I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of opinions. And I think with Buccolo being the, test event for Tokyo in the format, I think a lot of people had a lot of questions, right off the bat. There were things that there was a lot of reading the rules over and over and over, and less Jenny,
familiar with that one.
Rereading them, almost taking on a lawyer perspective and reading rules. And But it was really interesting. I mean, even the U.S., unfortunately, Jenny Brannigan had an unfortunate fall, and that disqualified. Well, but it didn't disqualify her, excuse me. So when she came off, we all kind of thought, or at least I did, that meant that Matt's score was then going to be the one that counted. And I think for several of us in the thick of it, it wasn't until the next day where we understood that if Matt didn't show jump in Jenny's place, then what would happen was the team would incur not only the 200 penalties from Jenny being quote unquote eliminated in the cross country phase, but they would also incur an additional 20 penalties for Matt show jumping in her place. So it was actually less points if she jumped herself. So there's all these things, and I think that was the most fascinating part.
And that's something that's so unnatural, isn't it? Because we all think you get eliminated, you can't continue, but there are circumstances whereby you can continue under the Olympic format. I think there's going to listeners, we will, I promise you, do a bit of a myth buster going into Tokyo.
Yeah,
so
and if you're listening and you're confused, you're not alone. Everyone's confused. I mean, I think it's really interesting too, because at Bugalo, the difference, right, that will be very different from Tokyo, is that Matt Flynn, who was the alternate, if you call him that, was able to still compete in all three events. Now, at Tokyo, he will not. That person will literally be sitting there in the wings, but with the team the entire time and in the venue, and they're waiting to see if they're basically tapped in for just one phase. Like if you're tapped in and you haven't done your dressage test at all, and now you got to go cross country. So I think it's going to be tremendously interesting, in my opinion, just to see how the selectors for each country pick that alternate person, because from a mental standpoint, it requires something so exponentially different. It's not like you're the alternate, the traveling reserve, and you get to the venue and then someone's horse, isn't ready for jog and you're in. It's
or
so
you're
not,
than that. And then you kind of sit back and kind of support the rest of the team.
I mean, it's so different than that. And mentally, it is fascinating. And I think it is going to require someone who has such amazing mental toughness, because as riders, we get into, a system at these big events, and you prepare for the first phase and prepare for the second phase and the third phase. And this is going to shake that up quite a bit.
Yeah. And also it's very out of the sort of the norm for the horses as well. They're used to going to an event, doing dressage, and then doing the jumping bits, whereas they might just go cross country, or they might just go and do their show jumping. Honestly, it is absolutely fascinating. And I have to admit, I'm very much now on the basis that I'm all on board with embracing it, because I think it is going to make for a hugely exciting competition as part of the Olympics. And it's a case of now saying, right, let's understand it, let's break it down, and let's just absolutely enjoy it, because it is different. We know it's different. And like you say, there's lots of opinions. There's lots of people that not necessarily understand it, because it isn't the most simple thing, but it is going to make for an unbelievably exciting competition. And every single horse that goes cross country, every single horse that does anything, it is going to make a massive impact on that team leaderboard, because one fall from one member previously, you could have actually discounted it and it would have been fine, best of three, no problem at all. But now, that puts so much pressure on the whole team. And I think we'll see team orders making a real impact on individual medals. And it's just, it's going to be fascinating. I cannot wait.
Yeah, just one more thing on that. I mean, I think what's going to be really interesting too is, for me, as a spectator, it was really interesting because Brannigan unfortunately had her fall first in the rotation. So then essentially your country's out of the medal position, So the only downside I've seen to this way is, in the past, if the first rider went out, you were still kind of on the seat of your pants watching, because not that people won't be watching, but it just changed the whole feeling real quickly, because you don't have that alternate whose score can come in and scratch score.
I think we're going to see, it's going to feel like an exceptionally quick competition, because it's going to be so fast and furious. There's going to be literally no let up. It's going to be very full on, but yeah, we will watch this space. Looking forward to Tokyo next year because there is going to be plenty of changes, but there's going to be plenty of excitement as well. And we may see this team format change again. We most likely will see it change again. But this is how it's going to run for next year. So this is what we've got to understand and enjoy it, because it is a real high point of our sport. So if we step away from Tokyo, kind of away from Tokyo, but actually keeping on kind of everything is building towards Tokyo, because all roads lead to Tokyo now. Every single result has a serious meaning. We're reading into everything. We spoke about Fair Hill recently. Derm and I did a review show. If you haven't listened to it, you can go and listen to it. Eventingpodcast.com, and it's on Le Lion d'Angers, the Young Horse World Championships, and also the US National Championships at Fair Hill. Just a word on Paddy the Caddy, Frankie, from your perspective, because he's one of my favourite US horses. And you actually described him earlier to me, and I thought this was a lovely way of putting it, as a bit of a nation's sweetheart.
Yeah, I mean, I think Paddy the Caddy is, to me, like America's sweetheart. I've been such a fan of his for so long, and such a huge fan of Erin Sylvester, and I've worked with Erin a ton through my business, and I'm just such a big fan of her. She's a, quiet, sweet type person, and just really deserved this win. And, Paddy's had some big wins in his career before. He won Rebecca Farm in the past. He's, for whatever reason, just to me, kind of an underdog, America's sweetheart, American thoroughbred. He's just a really cool type, and his partnership with Erin to me is very, very special. And it was really quite remarkable and great to see them get the win in a muddy finish there at Fair Hill.
Yeah, the weather looked pretty reminiscent of what we've got over here in the UK at the minute, actually. So Paddy the Caddy, Erin Sylvester won the US national title this year. But one thing that actually came into the forefront, Derm and I did discuss it briefly on the review podcast, is the 15 penalty rule for missing a flag. Two big names in Philip Dutton and Doug Payne both fell victim to 15 penalties.
And Will Coleman.
And Will Coleman. Okay, so three of the big names. When you have high profile events like this and there are high profile penalties given, there's always going to be more discussion around it. What's your take on it from being a rider? How does a rider sort of read and understand that 15 penalty rule as things stand at the moment?
The 15 penalty rule seems above my pay grade, to be honest with you. But I think that one of the things that the riders are really struggling with, and why hopefully we're going to see a change next year, is because each ground jury essentially can basically decide how they're viewing it uniquely from others. So it really, or that's how it's come across to the riders. So one of the things that I think riders are struggling most with is it's not clear, right? In cross country before now, typically it was clear, either you were in or you were out, or you had a refusal or you didn't, and now it's very kind of on the line and from the certain angle, and a little bit more open to interpretation. And I think riders are struggling with that, and rightfully so. And I think, it'll be interesting to see what happens with this rule, because it's really shaken up a lot of leaderboards this year, especially in the US, and changed what would have been for some people some really top finishes, and their hair on the back of their neck's a bit ruffled, and I really get why. So it'll be interesting. Again, a little bit, the details of all of it are above my pay grade, but I wouldn't want to be on either side of it. I think from a ground jury perspective, they have a lot harder job than I would want in a lot of cases, having to make these decisions. And from a rider perspective, it's really frustrating. So I don't think kind of there's one way to look at it that's really working well at the moment. And I think it'll be really interesting and important what happens with this rule.
I find it really interesting in so much as the ground jury are there to implement the rules as they stand. So they have to implement that rule as they read it. That's their job. Now, it's obviously got a lot better this year. I know in the spring there was a huge amount of discussion about it, and it was clarified going into Kentucky, which made a massive difference. And it has settled down a little bit. But I think now with the technology that we have, and when you go to an event, we're very lucky. And in some ways, it makes life harder to a degree. But we have so many different camera angles. There is so much more technology that can support and kind of help people with their decisions that I'm sure we will see it develop. And I'm sure we will see it tinkered with. It might not all be for next year, but I'm sure that there will be amendments and development with it in the future. Let's go away from the heavy hitting stuff and sort of the hardcore rules. Let's talk about the last couple of big events over in the US, because there's Galway coming up and there's some big names competing there. And then we'll go on to talk about Akala, because the final long format 4-star, there's actually some very interesting horses, listeners, that you will not want to let pass you by. So let's talk about Galway first. And there's a couple of horses there, Frankie, that you're really looking forward to seeing.
Yeah, I think there's some exciting horses for the future from the West Coast in general. Not a huge division for sure. For me, the one that stands out the most is Tammy Smith. Obviously, a member of High Performance, has had some big results, and just one of those members that was the highest placing American at Buccolo. But she's got some heavy hitters in her string coming up, and one of those, for me, the two heavy hitters, both owned by Ruth Bly. One of them is called On Vogue. That horse won the intermediate division at the American Eventing Championships. So it's a huge division with some really nice horses, and she came out on top of that division. And Tammy hasn't had this ride very long, but this is a mare she thinks super highly of, and the mare is going to be doing her first 4 long at Galway Downs. So I think that's one to watch. And for me, my favorite horse in Tammy's entire string is a horse called Donito. And that horse, I think, is one I'm going to go ahead and make a really bold prediction that he's going to rival My Bomb even on the flat in the very near future. And
we love a bold prediction.
I'm going to go bold. He's a little horse who doesn't know that he's as great as he is, but that's one of my favorite things about him. She calls him Cheeto Puff. He's this little redhead, and he's doing the 3 long. But keep an eye on him. He's had some huge wins in his career so far, and he's, I think, a horse that you're going to see really people looking out for and nervous if he's in their division very, very soon in next year for sure.
Okay, well, we will look out for that, because that's really interesting. I mean, listeners, just to put it into context, as one that can challenge the sorts of dressage tests that My Barm does, we're looking regularly mid-low 20s here. So Donito, there you go, Tammy Smith, one for you to keep an eye on and look to develop. Just a 10-year-old this time. So we'll be stepping up.
And On Vogue too. I mean, she's really amazing. She's a mare and a lady who takes a little more time to trust, but she seems to be developing a really good partnership with Tammy. And I'm going to put it out there that I think they're going to top the leaderboard at Galway, even in her first time at the level. Maybe, I don't want to jinx anything, but I think those 2 horses are going to make a big impact, at least on the West Coast here really soon.
And actually would be another for Tammy just to tick in the box heading in towards Tokyo 2020, because it never hurts to have too many horses qualified at all.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so on from Galway on to Akala, which is sort of the last big event of the year. Now, listeners, there's a couple of horses that we're going to talk about here.
Hold on to your seats here.
Yes, I'm building this up, but there's a reason I'm building it up. So the first one I'm going to actually pass over to you, Frankie, because Marilyn Little, RF Scandalous, who have been top 5 in Kentucky, they've had numerous wins at the top level. The horse has had a little bit of time off, but she is back and she is coming forward for the 4-star short in Akala. And this is a big one for the Team US going into 2020.
Yeah, so this mare is back. She's back from an injury, but seems to be back in really top form. She won the preliminary at Morven Park in October. She did the 4-star combined test at Maryland this month, which she won as well. And she is back on the international scene with Maryland, and they will be contesting the 4-star shorts at Ocala. So going to be interesting to see this mare back. I know there'll be a lot of eyes on her, and then she'll have to work to get her Tokyo qualification, obviously, next year. But the mare's back, and you have to wonder if it's just in time.
Yes. Well, she would get a 4-star short at the end of this year. She hasn't got her 4-star or 5-star long qualification in 2019. So she would have, listeners, until the 1st of June 2020 to do that. I imagine that would be a Kentucky conversation to be had. But I'm really looking forward to seeing them back. I think it's fantastic that she's coming back to top level. And I think this is one that we will be really, really following closely going into 2020. The one I'm going to throw out there for you to watch, listeners, is actually in the long format 4-star. So this would be a combination that are very much looking forward to a qualifying ticket to Tokyo. And it is none other than the absolute legend. And if he goes to Tokyo next year, it will be his 7th Olympic Games. Philip Dutton, the individual bronze medalist from Rio, that was with Mighty Nice. Now he has a new kind of weapon in his armor. I always get slated when I start talking about weapons on this podcast. If you listened to I can't even remember, I think it was the Linear preview show, listeners, it means something that I don't think it means. But anyway, Philip Dutton, fantastic new addition to his string in the form of Carlton, who actually was produced over in Australia by Stuart Tinney. That was back until 2016, then came over to the UK, was ridden by Francis Whittington, was 6th at the Blenheim 9-year-old class, that really prolific class there. Then went to Michelle Kenny for Ireland, a short spell with Lauren McCluskey. Basically, the horse has been sold to the United States and has gone to Philip Dutton's yard. So that is a hugely exciting horse for him, because going into next year, Frankie, it's safe to say, this is a rider that any team would be delighted to have on their roster.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think now, like we said, with the new format, there's only 3 spots. And, I think Phil wants one of them, and rightfully so. And I think that this horse is a big time horse, and that's already been proven. And Phil obviously needs no introduction as one of the biggest time riders that we've seen for sure in this country ever, and across the globe. So Carlton and Philip are doing the 4 long, and I can't wait to see this combination out in action and see it in person, hopefully.
I'm really looking forward to seeing it. I loved this horse when he was over in the UK, and he's definitely one that is ultra talented. So on to his 3rd continent, actually. He's been over in Australia, he's been over in Europe, and now he's over in the States. So well-travelled as well, which actually, knowing a horse can travel well is not a bad thing going into next year either. Just saying.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, let's just pick out a few other horses for you to watch in the 4-star long. You've got the likes of Emily Hamel and Corvette, who had a slight miscommunication, shall we say, at Fairhill, but they have rerouted. And Corvette, listeners, if you're not familiar with him, he is just the most awesome little pocket rocket that is just brilliant fun to watch. And she does a great job on him because he's not the easiest.
Yeah, I mean, I think that horse is so fun to watch. Like you said, he's just kind of a small but mighty little package, and he's a really exciting horse just to get to see. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how they rebound from Fairhill and how they do. I'm really, really interested to watch that pair.
So you've got them. Who else have you got in the 4-star long format? You've got some.
Well, Philip's also riding Sea of Clouds, so he has 2 mounts in the long division, I believe. And then, we'll see a couple other good ones as well. I believe that we have...
Landmarks Monte Carlo, Lauren Kiefer.
Yes, actually. That was one I identified on my sheet before, but now have lost my notes. So that's... welcome to the Echo Ratings Eventing Podcast team, Frankie, because that regularly happens. I wouldn't worry about it at all. Figuring out my ways. But Lauren, had even more, good finishes at Fairhill. She's done so well overseas this year. She's such a talented rider. And this horse is one that she's done super well on in the past. So I'm a little bit surprised she didn't take him to Fairhill and save him for Ocala, but I think that's really exciting. And, there's some really great horses to watch in this division. And, for me, what's been interesting is how much riders have rallied behind this event to keep it going. And, last year, even I was on a text message chain, and riders were donating money to jumps and any way they could contribute to keep the event afloat. So I think that's really exciting. Catherine Coleman obviously is coming back over from being overseas. I believe she's moving her stable back to base it full time in the US. And so that's interesting to me as well.
That's incredible. So just on that point of Akala, obviously riders love the venue so much that they've actually been investing in it to make sure that it continues to run. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the status of it was this year, but last year there was talk that they weren't going to be able to run the long division, and riders really stepped up to help. And to me, you know, that's something that's really exciting to see. And when riders do that, it kind of makes you realize that an event is really special to them and really necessary on our calendar. So I was pretty intrigued and excited to see that myself.
The eventing community. I absolutely brilliant.
One more for me, you know, this time from a Canadian perspective is obviously...
Oh, you're going to steal my horse.
Are
you going to steal them? Oh, Frankie.
No introduction, but Jess Phoenix, you got to love that girl, and she sure knows how to ride. So she's got two, obviously Pavarotti, who we've seen for many, many years with Jess, and Spoke Sounds too. So 2 horses in that furlong, and Jess could steal a very good finish there.
She really could. I mean, Pavarotti, just as a backup to why you should be watching out for him with Jess Phoenix, is they actually won the individual gold at the Pan American Games in 2011, took individual silver 4 years later in 2015 in Toronto, and then was so unlucky not to make it 3 individual medals from 3 this year, but finished individually 5th. So they... Admittedly, that is the level below, but they have incredible form for Canada. They've been top 20 at Kentucky. They've been to the World Equestrian Games. You name it, this horse has done it. So keep an eye out for those. Can I ask, I'm going to put you on the spot, who wins Akala?
Oh, man.
Go on, give us a name. Big Phil. Which
I'm going to give
horse?
it to him. I think he and his new friend they're going to win it. But
Colchin.
I mean, yeah, I'm going to put the pressure on Big Phil, and he likes pressure, so there you go. But, I mean, I think Phil's had an up and down year this year, and I think it would be really good for him to be able to have a big win to finish it out with a new partner that is definitely going to be on all the selectors' radar going into next year.
Yeah, I agree. I think Colchin is the one to watch. I really like Sea of Clouds, only an 8-year-old stepping up to the level for the first time. Very good in the jumping phases, but does just need to knock a couple of penalties off his dressage to get down into the low 30s and even break into the 20s. Frankie, it's been an absolute pleasure. We have loved having you on this episode of the EquiRatings Eventing Podcast, and we will be looking forward to watching your progress with Chatwin as we go into 2020.
Sounds good. And I'm so excited to join you guys more on the show. And thank you so much for having me. And we'll see what's to come. It's going to be fun to watch the end of the year here, and definitely a lot to see going into next year. So
lots to see, lots to understand going into Tokyo 2020 as well. Frankie, thank you very much. And listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this insight into US eventing. And we have so much more in store for you. Make sure you stay tuned. eventingpodcast.com. You can listen to all of the previous episodes on there. Make sure you subscribe. Download it for free in your app store as well. And if you fancy, leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back very shortly with another episode of the EquiRatings Eventing Podcast. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Eventing Podcast Classics. Don't forget that the entire back catalogue of the show are available to go back and listen to for free on your chosen platform, or just go to equiratings.com/podcast and you can find the link to go and look back and peruse them at your leisure. There's over 500 previous podcasts, everything from interviews, event previews and reviews, you name it. It is all available for you to go back. So why not go and have a delve and see what you might listen to next. For now, though, that is all we've got time for. We'll be back very soon with more. Thank you for listening to the EquiRatings Eventing Podcast.
Have a wonderful day, everybody. And I look forward to having you back with us soon.
Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more.
Listeners, we'll speak to you again soon.